ये कह दूँ कि भाई तेरी बेटी काम वाम नहीं कर रही, ठीक है, और ये घर भर के काम वाम भी नहीं कर रही, और मेरे को कुछ टाइम
de biti mă suplar pe ea. Nu putem să. फिर पराठा देऊ पड़ा morse bezahlen worden. Und das ist genau das, was wir noch vorliegen, Ziele. Okay? Wandern geht. Geht wandern.
then you probably need to understand that before we actually move on to the next step. So effectively, I will cover the very basic ideas of outbound rules, but there is a module in the advanced training course which covers the dial plans and advanced core routing in more details. So let's talk obviously, let's get the basic core working, obviously, in my opinion. So go to outbound rules on the page, left-hand side, click on add buttons. Now first set the name of the outbound rule. So maybe you have multiple different SIP trunks, maybe, on your PBX, and you want to use outbound rules based on, mobile calls, international calls, local area networks, and vice versa. So effectively, you can create rules depending on what you want to do. If you just have one SIP trunk, you don't have to complicate things, right? So you just create one rule, and then that will handle every single different kind of numbers. So if you do have multiple different rules, make sure they are descriptive in nature so you understand what each rule is doing. And again, if you do have a problem, it will help the administrator to in some of troubleshooting as well. So then in the calls to number, starting with prefix criteria field, enter 0 to 9 and plus. Essentially with this, we are telling 3CX to allow any calls starting with any number between 0 and 9 and or the plus character. So if somebody is in a habit, or if habit of entering +44 instead of every number, or maybe your phones are configured, or maybe if you're sending it from a gateway, the gateway might be doing, if you're connecting to an existing analog PBX of some sort. The different criteria is how people dial numbers. So it really depends on how your old PBX was configured, and to make sure the new PBX is configured a similar-ish way to be able to enhance, to be able to keep the transition from old to new seamless effectively. So once the criteria has passed, obviously, which is plus if the number starts with plus, or anything between 0 and 9, now we need to tell the 3CX which trunk to use in order to make the call. And this is done by setting the rules under the provider section. So if the provider is the first rule is busy, so effectively you can see different options there, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you've got VoIP providers, you can block calls, you can strip numbers, you can prepend outbound caller ID, you can do also different things here. Okay? And as I said, we're not going to cover that in more detail, but effectively for each specific route, we can modify the format of the dialed number by stripping and then by prepending numbers to the beginning of the number, which will then be sent to the relevant trunk. And we can also modify the outbound caller ID on a per route basis. There are different ways you can change the outbound caller ID. You can add the actual caller ID on the users, but you can also do that over here as well if you want to do that from that point of view. Now, also on the SIP trunk providers page, whilst the list of capabilities as clip no screening, if it is defined, it's not shown obviously here, but if it's defined as yes, then a different caller ID than what is assigned to the account can be passed trunk. Now, this is important, but because not many providers will support it. What it means is, let's say, for example, you have migrated the customer from an old system to the new system, right? But they still have a physical line which is in the process of migrating, which hasn't migrated to your SIP line yet. So what you can do is, again, there's an NDA, there's a lot of things you have to do in the background with your SIP trunk provider. If the SIP trunk provider so what you can do is you can ask the SIP trunk provider to allow that specific DDI to pass through. So let's give you an example. So if a user has moved from London, let's call it simple, to Manchester, right? Or maybe Huddersfield, let's call it Huddersfield. So they used to have 0207 number, but now the new DDI range is 0142 number. But they still have the old number because it's an old number. So they still want, when they dial out, they still want to be to display that number so people know that it's coming from a company ABC, just to keep it simple. So what you will have to do is you will have to show your bills to your SIP trunk provider, effectively, as I said, depending on the SIP trunk provider, and then based on that, they will acknowledge that, okay, you do own this line, so they can then allow that specific DDI to be passed through. And what it means is when you dial out, if I'm receiving the call, I will still see your own number. Again, this, as I said, this is quite tricky. Yeah, but most, I know Gamma and BT do support it, but there are other providers who will probably support it as well. But there's some NDAs and it needs to be done in the background if we do have to do that. So effectively, so that's what it is. So if you do select it, that's what you can do with it. Now, when the route is busy, this is the provider not allowing any more calls to go through, maybe due to the limitations of concurrent calls allowed to go through the account. Again, when you buy the SIP trunks, you generally tend to buy a number of simultaneous channels you can use or calls you can use, and vice versa. So you have the option to select a second route, which could be another SIP trunk, or it could be a gateway, or even it could be something else. So when the provider is unavailable, this means the PBX has not received response from the provider within 32 seconds. So that's how long it tries for. The PBX will then move on to the next route in attempt to process the call, if there is a next route. So once you've set up, obviously, that, press OK, the outbound call will be created, and any users on the system will be able to make outbound calls to the trunk we just specified here. The next bit is quite interesting because it involves the emergency numbers. So emergency numbers are effectively telephone numbers, which includes police, ambulance, fire department, and usually the emergency numbers are 3-digit numbers, but at least in the UK, which may overlap the extension numbers if your system is configured with 3-digit number. So I tend to obviously tell my customer, don't use 3-digit number, or if you do use them, make sure you don't create any extension which has numbers like 999, 111, or any emergency numbers effectively. So during the deployment of the PBX, you will need to identify the emergency numbers which will be used. So avoid configuring extensions with these numbers, and effectively, and that will help you to make sure when somebody does dial an emergency number, it goes out for the PBX and not to the extension number. Okay. You can configure emergency numbers from PBX general settings. Each emergency number will have its own outbound rule, which will be defined as an entire emergency number being the prefix. With the emergency number, you can also modify the dialed number as well if you do want to. Now, calls to emergency numbers can also be limited to particular extension or extension group. This is particularly effectively helpful when you need to define specific locations for the emergency services to make it easier for people to pinpoint to the location of the emergency. So like in hospitals,